What's going on YouTube? It's your boy Mr. Lux, aka the Merry Gamer, and I'm back again with my Battlefield Weapon Guide number 2. And today's weapon, we're going to be looking at the G36C. Now, this is another weapon that I really enjoyed playing with back in the day on Rainbow Six, and it's just a cool looking weapon to me. I like the look and the design of this weapon, but let's see if it holds up on the battlefield. As you can see, this is my first gameplay with the gun, so I don't have any attachments, I don't have anything unlocked for this weapon, and the iron sights leave a lot to be desired. I really don't like iron sights like this. See where it's enclosed? It limits your field of view when you're aiming down sight, and it makes you're very limited into, you know, taking out multiple targets when you're aiming down sights. That's your best bet, is to just aim down. I mean, it's to do hip fire with this weapon, because it's really tough with the default iron sights. But the weapon does kind of open up a little bit more once you unlock a scope. Excuse me, a scope for it. So let's look at the stats for this weapon. The G36C, it has an RPM of 650, and that puts it on the low end for the carbines. It's not really a fast shooting weapon. I mean, I didn't really notice much of a drop off in terms of being able to put bullets down range, but it does, based upon its stats, it does rate on the lower end of the carbine class. It has a muzzle velocity of 500 meters per second, and also a max distance of 750 meters. Now, it does have a bullet drop of 15 meters per second, and you know, I'm still trying to investigate really what all that actually means. However, that is a you know, that is probably the standard or the norm for all the carbines. In terms of bullet damage, this weapon does a max damage of 25 up to 8 meters, and then it drops off to 15.4 at 50 meters. So as you can see, you know, up close you'll be able to kill your enemy in 4 shots. However, you know, once you get outside that close combat, outside of that 8 meters, you're going to have to put more bullets in your opponent, at least 7 to 8 bullets to drop them, which is kind of unfortunate. But as you can see from this gameplay footage that you're looking at, I'm successfully taking down enemies at close and long range. As you can see, I'm dropping some enemies pretty quickly. So, you know, sometimes stats can be deceiving on weapons. It's all about control, and that's what you have to really take into account with any weapon guide that you look at. You know, stats can say one thing in just a performance standpoint, but once you're in game, once you're in the battle, how does it perform under pressure? So let's look at the magazines and the reload. The reload time with 1 bullet left in the chamber is 2.1 seconds. A completely empty G36C will leave you at about 2.85 seconds. So it's actually one of the faster reloads of the carbines, to be honest. And the reload time threshold is 0.8. I'm not really sure what the threshold is. I said that in my last weapon guide. This gun does hold a magazine size of 31 bullets. That's 30 in the clip, 1 in the chamber. Now, with any weapon guide, let's look at the real you know, differentiating factor with all these weapons is the recoil, because that's really where most weapons kind of set themselves apart as either the go-to or the avoiding weapon, because you know, the weapon can have the fastest RPMs, it can have the best bullet max damage, but if the recoil is all over the place, your bullets are not going to be connecting to your target, so it's kind of like all for naught. So with this weapon, with the G36C, you're looking at a recoil upwards of about 0.25. And just to kind of give you a little more detail, the recoil upwards this is how much the weapon kicks upwards after each round in degrees. So 0.25 degrees. Then your recoil to the left is 0.3, and recoil to the right is 0.3. And this is how much the weapon can kick to the left or right. And this is kind of random. You really can't determine which way it's going to do it, and it's such a varying degree left or right. That could make the weapon hard to control. But again, I didn't feel this in game. I really didn't feel that big of a recoil deficit. in game. And when you compare this against some of the other carbines out there, you know, it's almost middle of the road in a sense, maybe a little bit higher than middle of the road in terms of, well, a little bit more less than average. But again, it's going to come down to user control, how much you can compensate for that. You know, what attachments are you equipping with this weapon to kind of mitigate some of that recoil that the stats of this weapon would dictate. The recoil decrease, which is it's a negative, well, it's down 18, and this is how fast the weapon recovers from the recoil after you stop firing. So this is measured in degrees per second, and this is pretty much about the average for the carbines, although the Ace 52Q CQB, that one has a 12. So I mean, there are carbines out there that have slightly less, but I think actually that is the only one. Yeah, the carbine, the ACE 52 CQB is probably the one that has the least amount of the recoil decrease. Now the first shot recoil modifier, that's the number in orange, that is a 1.8, and that is how much more the first round kicks. So in 1.8, well, on the good side of the recoil kick from that first bullet, a lot of the carbines are in the 2.3, 2.5, 2.0. There are some that have less than a 1.8, like the AK5C, which is a 1.65. So you really want to have a low number on your first shot recoil modifier, because that's really going to be key, especially when you equip some of these stronger scopes, like your medium range scopes, that you're really notice a lot more of the kick, just because of how much it's zooming in, so it's going to magnify the kick a lot more. So having a weapon with a low kick, a low recoil multiplier is going to be definitely beneficial to you as the soldier on the battlefield. All right, so let's move over to the next category, which is going to be the spread. You know, the less moving that you're doing when you're shooting, the more accurate your shots are going to be downrange when you're aiming down sight. So let's move over to the hip fire section, because I know that, you know, a lot of times you may not have a chance to pull up your sight, so you have to react much more quickly. So when you're not moving and you're hip firing in a standing position, you know, your hip fire spread is a 2. And so basically this is how much off the bullets can fly from the position where you're aiming. When you're crouching, it drops down to a 1.5, and when you're prone, it drops down to a 1. How often do you hip fire when you're prone? Usually prone, you're in a safe location, away from the action, probably using a medium to long range scope and taking your opponents out, making yourself a much smaller target and much harder to identify. So I don't think I've come across many instances where I would hip fire from a prone position, unless some enemy just happens to walk up on you or run by you by surprise and you're just trying to react quickly. That would be the only time I think that I would come across something like that. Now let's look at your hip fire when you're moving, because this is typically more of a reasonable numbers to look at, because that usually what's happening when you're hip firing. You're probably moving or running, and you happen to run into an enemy, you have to react much quickly. So when you're standing up and running, it's 2.5 in terms of your spread. Crouching is a 2 and prone is a 1.5. So you can see the difference when you're running. Basically, the standing position from a non-moving state and the crouch position from a moving state are basically identical in terms of your spread. And the same thing with the standing, not moving crouch versus when you're moving prone, your hip fire is identical. So basically with this weapon, if you're going to hip fire in its default state, you want to at least be in a crouching position to get a tighter spread. So let's move to the next section over here. It's actually still in the spread category, but this is the spread increase per shot, and this is how much the spread increases per shot fired, and this is a 0.085. And this is probably why you see me making good contact in the videos that I'm showing here, is because it's probably the lowest spread of all the carbines. And as I do a comparison, the closest to it is the AKU-12 with a .88, and then the only one that equals the G36C is the Type 95B1. It comes in at a .085 as well. So that is a key factor in why when I'm aiming down sight, my bullets aren't going all over the place. In addition to whatever attachment you have on your weapon to kind of help balance it out. So that's key. So you also want to look at that number. So that orange 0.085, that is going to be a key identifier when you're aiming down sight, even balancing out that recoil. So, and then the number below it is your spread decrease per shot, and this is basically how much spread decreases per second after you shot. And this number is consistent across all the guns in the carbine class. So in summary, for the G36C, in my opinion, this weapon was really fun to play with and use in terms of just being able to stay on target, kill quickly, maneuverability. As you can see, I mean, you getting headshot after headshot, and your gun is not wavering all over the place. It's really good for close quarters and medium range combat. And I just had a really fun time playing with this weapon. It didn't take me any time to jump right in and get used to using it. It looks great with all the attachments. They all fit very nicely with the weapon. So I would definitely recommend trying this weapon out. It's really fun to use in battlefield. As for my recommendations for this weapon, as far as attachments go, I would recommend the heavy barrel, which is good for any carbine and assault rifle, and also the angled foregrip, and also the ergo vertical grip. So equipping those attachments would definitely improve your accuracy with this weapon. So stay tuned for my next weapon guide, where we will be covering the M4, so that should be pretty fun, so stay tuned for that. Until the next time, it's your boy Mr. Lux, aka the Merry Gamer, aka the Below Average Gamer, and I'm out. Peace.